so it's fresh in my mind. I'm ready to talk. I think I would like to maybe start with the question that I think is on all of our minds, which is Kittentits. One could choose any title, and you chose Kittentits. It's unforgettable. It's unique. I'm sure it's caused some waves. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of where that came from?
Yeah. So I worked on this book. I started it in 2009, and I worked on it on and off for many years. And in that time, I had many like sort of filler titles I would just put on I didn't really like. I was like, I'll just call it that for now. And I finally, so I was working on and off for all these years. And then finally, it came time where I sent the manuscript to my agent. It was ready to send out to publishers. And I still didn't really like the title. This is boring. And it was the last title was The Hidden Hand. Was it The Hidden Hand? I don't know. I wasn't in love with it, but it was just kind of a working title. But my agent, he hadn't said anything about it. And at that point, I was like, you're just doing something if he tells you to do it, right? Otherwise, you're just, because I was so tired of working on it, and I just wanted it to go out. So the manuscript was all ready. It was all like cleaned up and washed and shampooed and all that. And I'm like, okay, I guess we're done. And then he emails me. He's like, okay, Holly, let's talk about the title. And he's like, he gave me like 2 days. He's like, let's have a meeting in a couple days and just come up with a bunch of titles. And I'll come up with a bunch of titles. I'll have my intern come up with a bunch of titles. And so he sends me like the day before the list of titles him and his intern came up with, and meanwhile I never really had a couple of them. I was like, well, maybe they'll come up with something good. That's what I was hoping. And so I read them and I'm like, because it's a really hard book to title, because you can't, like, if you pick any one little element, then it's like it seems to focus the book that direction, you know? So I didn't really like any of those. So I came up with some also kind of half-assed, like not great ones either. And so I write him an email, I'm like, here's mine, and we have it. And then on my email, like the very last line, I put like, or we could just call it Kittentits, LOL, JK, right? Like I was just joking. I wasn't serious. It was just a joke. And so then like the next day we have the meeting on Zoom, and he's like, he's all very serious, and he's like, okay, Holly, and he does like the triangle thing. He's like, there is one title. There is one title. Which one do you think it is? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. And he's like, we're calling it Kittentits. I was like, for real? I was just kidding. And yeah, and then I got my mom here. I had to call my mom and tell her. My book is now called Kittentits. Yeah, so it was a joke. Like I wasn't really serious about it. But then I like it because we were talking earlier. You know, the book is not for everybody, and I like that my title is like there's no false advertising, right? So I'm behind it. At first, I was a little like, oh man, I'm gonna have to go around saying I'm the author of Kittentits, you know, and like, I even feel a little weird, like if I'm out in public, somewhere where there might be children aside from mine, I'm like, you know, but I've kind of gotten used to it. So yeah, so that's how. But it was a little weird at first, but now I really like it. I'm happy that we went with that. So it was all my agent.
I really like it. I mean, it's memorable. I will say I was a little bit startled, in part because so my mom, I think, personal story, because I was thinking of you telling your mom, and I think also in the acknowledgments you mentioned something, sorry for all the profanity in the book. I mean, there's the title, and the book is full of profanity.
It is, yeah.
Right, like every other word. Maybe we'll hear a little bit. And I was very startled. I loved it. But it was challenging for me when I was little. My mom swore a lot, I guess. That was kind of her thing. But then I was growing up, and she was like, well, I don't want my kid to swear. So every time she swore, and I heard her, she had to buy me something from the vending machine. So it was great. Yeah, and so I learned at an early age, I was like, oh, if you swear, you have to, like, buy people stuff. And so I don't want to buy people stuff.
Molly owes a lot of stickers.
Exactly. So and I think when I was growing up, I think a lot of, pretty, conservative-y Midwestern family, wasn't a lot of profanity, and then I think when I was growing up, one of the refrains I often heard was, if you're swearing a lot, it's because you're lazy, right? Like, swearing is lazy language use. It means that you can't think of a better way to say it, and that's on you. And I was thinking of that when I was reading your book because the language is so precise. It's so poetic. I mean, there's so many.
I think cursing can be very creative.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about.
I disagree with that.
Yeah, I think this book has had me disagree with it as well. So I wanted to ask you about that because I think every single word is deliberate and you're doing something with the language here. And so I wanted you to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, so originally when I was working on it for a long time, she didn't really curse as much as she does. What I had her do a lot is she said effing all the time, like E-F-F-I-N-G. So it was always like effing this and effing that. And it was like her way of sort of being, trying to be like transgressive, but not really because she's just a kid. And then one day I remember I was working on a particular scene and I typed effing whatever, and then I was like, I'm so tired of always saying effing. And then I'm like, just let her say it. So I'm like, fuck it, and then I'm like, I like it, and I start, so like from that, and it might still be present. At that point, I'm like, I'm just gonna let her say it when it, honestly, a lot of the times I'm doing it for sound, right? Because there's some moments where certain syllables or rhythm of it, right, where it hit, wherever it's falling in the sentence, I like the sound of it. So in some places I still use effing, but I was tired of always I felt limited, I'm like, no, let's just let her go. And so there might be a point in the book where she suddenly starts to curse, like, more. I think I tried when I went back, I was aware of that, I'm like, okay, I gotta like go kind of make it, equalize it a little bit. So yeah, and I don't know, this is sort of an interesting bit. I had to, if you've read it already, you might remember, I had to go, one thing in my revisions, my final revisions I did, is I went back, the last thing I wrote for this book was chapter 3, where it explains why, because my editor was like, okay, I think we need, because there's going to be like pushback with the language, we need to have something where you talk about, like, we need to know, why does she curse so much? And in my mind, I'm like, kids curse. I mean, not all kids, right? Like every 10-year-old's different, but there are all kinds of childhoods, and I presume readers know that, and I've heard a lot of not my own child. He does not. He's very well behaved. He would never talk like Molly. But I've heard plenty in my own childhood and being around other children. So to me, I was not expecting it to be as shocking as some readers find it, because I've been around that a lot. I've been around that, and I like it as a writer. I think all language is fascinating, not just appropriate language. Inappropriate language is fascinating, right? It's like, I think it's really creative. And so anyway, I just sort of let her go one day because I've been working on it so long. I'm like, nah, just let her say it, and then it gives the prose. I think for me, it started to give it a little bit more energy. And so when I wrote that chapter 3, the last chapter I wrote, where she just really like unloads, like, I think that was cathartic for me or something, to letting it all out. And some of it, I don't even, like, it even made me a little, like, I don't not curse, but I certainly don't talk like this. And so I was really having to, like, come up with stuff, like, and it was a sort of a challenge to me, but I really enjoyed writing that. I'm so happy that was the last thing I wrote for the book. But, yeah.
It's really, it's really beautiful in this lovely moment, kind of when Molly discovers these words carved on the underside of a desk, I think is where she is, and she finds it, and then the whole world kind of opens up. Okay, I'm gonna try to read this line, the first 4 words she says that she found, and it's gonna, I'm already blushing. I'm gonna say it kind of quietly. Jizzcock, shit magnet, shitbag, bitch tits. Okay. fun. It keeps going
Yeah.
from there. I'm gonna stop. But then, and then she later is thinking about it, and she's thinking about language. Is such language mean? Does it cause suffering? And then, as you were saying, these words are awesome, and speaking them transforms me. I am a window, and their divine light shines through me. It's just this kind of, I love that you wrote this chapter last, and it came to be sort of one of Molly. She has a lot of sort of theories of the world and philosophy she lives by. And this
I really had to think about it, because when I first made her start talking like that, I wasn't doing it. This is just sort of how the voice came to me. And then when I started to really let her curse, I was like, yeah, I like that. It was intuitive. And then by my editor, though, I really had to think about, why does she, right?
Yeah.
And she wants, this for her is how she claims power in the world, right? This is how she can make herself big enough to be seen, because she's so small and so unimportant and has no power. And this is her attempt at making herself big and scary. And I don't know. I kind of, I don't like in real life, right? I would never want my child speaking like this. But on the other hand, I admire it. I admire her moxie, I guess.
She has a lot of moxie.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's brave,
Yeah.
which comes up later as well. Someone calls her brave, and she's like, it's not what she necessarily wants to be in that moment, but she is. Well, you heard me read a few lines. I think it might be nice if you were willing to read just a little bit from the novel, so we could hear it in your voice.
Sure. Okay. I will read for the first time. I'll just read the first chapter. It's like 9 pages. Okay. So this is the opening, chapter 1. It's Labor Day, the day Jeannie comes. I'm 10 years old and homeschooled by Evelyn. It's Calumet City, 1992, 3 months before the World's Fair in Chicago. In 3 months, I'll necromance the dead live on WGN, but today I wear side-striped shorts, dorky and tight, the kind of kids who go to school wear at gym time to play kickball. The day Jeannie comes, old fat Evelyn comes in, says, "No sass talk today, Molly. This is what you're wearing." Meaning these side-striped shorts, this puff-painted shirt she puff-painted, spongy letters floating across my nips saying, "Welcome, welcome." Yellow puff bees buzzing around the letters, my nips. All this for Jeannie, the first resident friend since the fire, our first resident correctional friend ever at the fire-rotted, nun-haunted House of Friends, a semi-cooperative living community of peace, faith, and action. I'd like to barf oceans on this shirt. I'd like to make some whiny kid put it on and barf on it while Jeannie watched and the whiny kid cried. That's how you welcome someone the day she gets out of prison. That's how you make her feel at home in her new halfway house where for 18 months the state of Illinois requires her to live. You remember what to do, Dad asks me. He means for outreach, but my brain's still on Jeannie, what she might look like, what prison features she might have. Acid burns, stab scars, a filed tooth for biting, stripes of pale finger skin where brass knuckles once lived. Maybe fingers missing, or maybe even no fingers. Maybe just one finger to curl, "Come here." To Dad, real snotty, I go, "Yeah, do you?" Because how could I forget? We do outreach each Wednesday, rain, sleet, snow. Dad was blind until 10 months ago when he hit his head in the fire. 2 people died. Evelyn's 40-year-old son Bruce and sister Regina, but Dad got back his vision when a flaming ceiling beam banged his head. Boom, just like that, he saw 2020. I'm not allowed to use the oven now, and for weeks after Evelyn wept like crazy. She stopped rolling her hair and let her garden go to shit. But Dad calls the fire the miracle of fiery complexity. If you ask him today why inside he still wears sunglasses, why he still walks into walls and asks to touch people's faces when they speak, he'll look at you a long time, super, super quiet, then whisper, "Miracle of fiery complexity, super, super quiet." And then, if also super quiet, you say, "Says who?" He'll say, "The Lord," normal volume, and that's all you'll get. Outreach is, we go door to door to the poor people in the apartment squares. If a kid answers the door, I say, "Hey, is your mom home?" Then when she comes, Dad starts in about organic community gardening, and Evelyn passes her pamphlets around. Usually the mom will let you in for politeness, but careful, careful. Her feet are not feet, they are 2 life rafts thinking, 2 clumps of teeny kids barnacling up to cankly masts. Watch. Always the bottom clinger gets foot flicked to the yard where bits of flushed toilet paper seep through the brown swamp, turdy white caps on a fish-pissy lake. Then the kid says, "Shit, Mama," and the mom says, "Shut your mouth, Rodney." But what I'm saying is, about organic community gardening, they give no shit. Still, I do my job, which is hand the poor kids their House of Friends organic community garden treat, a Dixie cup of chocolate pudding with smashed Oreos for dirt and gummy worms for worms. It's like the ground, I say, with worms, I go. Like a garden, I say, and ooh, they go, ooh, sticking their fingers all at once. On the walk back, Dad says he thinks we got some joiners, and Evelyn says definitely those twin girls for sure. But those girls weren't even twins, they were just sisters. One had bigger eyes and a mouth shaped like a shovel, while the other had half-bit chiclets for teeth. It's like, Dad and Evelyn, geez, like, oh my God, Dad and Evelyn, sometimes you guys are so fucking dumb. Dad still holds Evelyn's arms when we go down the sidewalk the same way he did when he couldn't see. The effect's like he's a tard, like Evelyn's Bruce was, and since I've got no time for tards, I walk 10 feet ahead. I jingle dimes in my pocket like whistling a song. We should be having ice cream. We should be stopping for pizza, I'm thinking. We should be home waiting for Jeannie, but no one alive or dead gives two shits what I think. No, instead for outreach, we do what we always do. We go to the graveyard to visit old dead Mom and new burnt up Bruce. We don't bother with Sister Regina, her ghost's at home haunting us. Dad and Evelyn don't see her, but I sure as hell do. Dad stands over Mom's grave, sunglassed and gloomy, gives her the weekly update like he has the 468 weeks since she's died. More rain, he says. Labor Day barbecue, he goes. New correctional friend, I say, tugging his shirt to remind him. New resident friend, he says, waving me away. This is how it is when he's busy grieving, always correcting, then shooing me away. Evelyn says, he just doesn't want me seeing him crying, but I think he wants to hog my dead mom whatever effing way. Like last week when the drive-thru lady slipped a 2 Live Crew tape in my Happy Meal and I borrowed his headphones when we got home first thing. I was walking around listening to 2 Live Crew all super fucking happy, and he saw me for once, happy, and yet yanked the headphones away. He was like, never ever touch these. These belong to your mom. These are not yours. Get out. Go away. Then he starts inspecting up close the orange foam ear things, and I'm all, God, what the hell? What are you even doing? And all super sad face, he goes, little wads of her earwax used to be stuck in these. And I said, that's so gross. That's effing disgusting. And he said, it's what I've got. Now go away. But it's not. It's not all he had. He still had the swim floaties Mom blew up when I was a baby, that when we found them after the fire were still filled with her air. I asked if I could have them, and Dad started crying and said, no, you cannot. Now go upstairs. So I climbed to the top step and sat there hidden, watched him press a floaty valve against his cheek for 5 minutes while he closed his crying trash eyes and let out her air. Which wasn't fair. Her breath was mine too. Evelyn must have agreed because that night after dinner when I went up to my room and I found the second floaty on my bed, still inflated, the note next to it said, what breeze lives, or some similar gibber shit. So I sat on my bed and did the same thing Dad did. Aimed my mom's breath all over my face, let it hit my eyes and mouth, let it fan my bangs out until the floaty went flat. No more air. Dumb shit me. I thought maybe this would let my mom's ghost out. Her ghost's been hiding since the day she died, 9 years. I thought whatever particles left of her from her puffs into the floaty might expand and take ghost shape, and that she'd phantomize in front of me slowly. If it were me and not Dad who let out her air. But nothing phantomized. Her ghost is nowhere. But Evelyn's so nice she weeds strangers' graves. She waves me over now to Bruce's lumpy mound where she's sitting. Bruce, as far as I know, is not a ghost either, because I don't fucking know. I don't know what the rules are. Maybe the rule is moms and tards don't get them. Time for my Quizlet on Jesus' peacemaker, Evelyn says. After 3 wrongs, she lets me go, so I go. I run grave to grave, bouncing my heels in the grass. Wonder with each one, is it a body still or is it bones yet? Think what monster hell I might do here with Jeannie. You bring the experience, I'll bring the shovel, I'll say. Then in my head, practice all the ways to say it.
Thank you. That's such a great opening. I mean, and one of the things we hear in those first few pages is that this is a book very much about grief. There's so much loss. And one of the refrains that keeps coming up in the book that I like from The Seagull, which I we find out Molly's mom acted, and she was in this recording of the sequel, and so Molly goes and watches it, and one of the lines that sort of recurs is this idea that the heaviest things happen off stage. And so when we begin the novel, all of these heavy things have already happened. Did you have this as kind of a refrain in mind when you were writing?
No, so it's another story. So originally, I wanted to use our town, and I had this like. So I spent most of when I wrote like about 6 drafts of this. I rewrote it about 6 times, and every time the second half was always the trouble. That's where I was like, and of course when you're having trouble in the second half, that often means going to the first half, and you have to plant a bunch of new stuff, and you have to sew it in, right? So when my first big notes for my agent were, okay, first half's good, second half we gotta figure out. And I changed things in such a way that I needed, how did this go? I needed, I for whatever reason, I can't even remember now how it was, but I'm like, I need to have her mom acting in a play, and I make her mom an actress, but that all came, like 5 rewrites in. And so I wanted to do Our Town, Thornton Wilder's Our Town, which is of course about a young, how old is, I don't remember how she, a really very young woman who dies during childbirth, and her ghost, sort of her ghost, comes back and observes like one day, and there's all this grief, it's a really heavy grief sort of work, and I've always liked it, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna have her be in Our Town, and then but I was silly, and I'm glad I didn't get too far, because my agent can't stop me. He's like, no, right, it's not public domain. So yeah, it's not public domain. So then I was like, oh, but I'd already kind of done the work where like I'm like, I need to play, because I'd already done enough. I didn't want to have to go back and like rethink the whole thing. So I'm like, well, it's in the public domain. And I went through and I'm like, and I don't know, I kind of spent a couple days just looking at stuff and trying to come up with things, and then I thought, Chekhov. And so I think I'd read the sequel like as an undergraduate, and then I started reading it, and like, wait, some of this is perfect, like the lines, right, and I'm like, this is it, and then I quickly emailed him like, I can use the sequel, right, is that okay? And he said yes. So yeah, and so then you just kind of work it in, right?
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, I love it because it just makes me think of I don't know, the ways in which sort of the constraints can really influence and inform the creativity,
yes.
right? Like if you only have these things to choose from, one of them will work.
Yes.
And
that line about how the heaviest things happen off stage, like that only existed because I had to go to Chekhov. I was with Chekhov. I'm like, well, what does this play say? And and I'm like, that's happening in this book. So you're right. Like it's just making the puzzle pieces work, and then you get really cool results that way.
Yeah, I really like that. I also like how many characters in the novel are artists.
Yes.
Of different kinds.
Oh, I'm so glad you noticed that.
We have the mother who is an actor. We have the Marcus who paints. We have the father who makes puppets in the basement for kind of Quaker outreach plays.
Yeah.
We have Jeannie who sketches and draws. Who else? Jeannie's mom.
Mombi. Yeah. Well, of course, obviously Marcus, but Mombi. I'm gonna say her. Mombi's an actor, and I think of all of them.
Yeah.
It's the most between her and DeMarcus. And so no one else has said anything about it. I'm like, that was what that for me. That was like, it's really about art.
I wanted to ask about that, kind of the role of the artist in the novel and how you see that.
I don't know. I think like all of the different artists in the book, they all have a different relationship to art, right? And so one of I had to cut a lot of the Mombi scenes out, so there's not as much Mombi as there used to be, but I really in some ways identify with her. Like there's one line, it goes something like, she says, if I could live inside a movie, I would. And her whole, everything about her character is driven by art. It is all she cares about, really. And I think about that sometimes, like, I'm not Mombi, but I think of all the characters, I think she's my favorite, and I identify with this idea that like I think anyone who grows up to be a writer or who's a big reader or loves film, I love both of those things so much, or music, right? There's this sense with art that it takes you to a better place, even if it's I mean this is not it's not a really good place, but it takes you somewhere where things are, what's the word I'm looking for? 'Cause it's not necessarily better. It's more. It's like things are more vivid and more alive, which is ridiculous because this is real life, right? And so I find this endlessly fascinating. So Mombi, like, she really would live if she could just be in an act 24/7 and be in a movie 24/7. She would. Now then like DeMarcus though, on the other hand, he's more high-minded. He takes his art very seriously, but he's not. I don't think he has any delusions though. He has much more mentally healthy than Mombi is for sure. But like they all have different attitudes about it, and I think it wasn't deliberate. Like I wasn't consciously like let's make a bunch of artists, but I started to notice a pattern. I'm like So I think it's probably just me, like thinking. I think that's something I think about a lot, right? Like what is art? What is its point? What does it do? And I think we all kind of just assume. I think there's a lot more disagreement about that among people in general than we talk about. Like I don't know about Molly. I don't know how. I think she would like to be an artist or be talented, but she sees her mother. She sees, I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I just know they are. And I know it's important in the book, and it's something I think about quite a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of that makes sense. I'm thinking of the way art too in literature. So I mean, all of art, it's a mode of escape, but also a way of kind of understanding. It's both at once, right?
It's both reality and not reality. It's a truth and not and made up, right? So I've always been interested in that, how that works.
Yeah, and I love it how it becomes a coping mechanism for so many of the characters who are dealing with so much suffering. It's really beautiful. You mentioned, I'm just going to ask one more question and then we'll open it up if there are other questions. But you were talking about the way we all sort of see art differently, and that made me think of our conversation before the event about a book in the world and people responding to it. And I had mentioned to Holly that my first novel was called Noah's Wife, and it's this kind of like mythological, fable-esque retelling of the flood story. It's whimsical, it's set in like the Pacific Northwest and modern, and there's animals and rain. But it's called Noah's Wife, and the back flap mentions a minister and mentions animals in a flood, and so Amazon categorized it as Christian fiction and historical fiction, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. So literary readers didn't pick it up, didn't think it was for them, and readers who were looking for Christian fiction would pick it up and then say like, she took the name of the Lord in vain on page 4, like 1 star, So that's why. So when I wrote my second novel, I was like, I'm gonna write about Slender Man basically, and no one's gonna call this Christian fiction.
Right. Right. Oh, I'm having the same. So I read some of my reviews and I'm like, oh, I'll show them. And I've already thought, I'm like, no, I don't do that.
But I want to talk about that. You mentioned, this sort of getting a tattoo that says "not for everyone," right? The book is so, and I've been telling people, it's bold, it's wild, it's innovative. I haven't read anything like it, and to me that's amazing. But other readers might be put off by that. So what is the experience of kind of putting it into the world?
Oh, it's fascinating. I wasn't expecting. I don't know. Like, okay, as a reader, I don't read books I'm not into. So like, if I don't like it. Well, I read. I kind of have an idea if I'm gonna. I can't imagine finding a book. I mean, like, like not reading. I would read it, but if I don't like something, I just stop reading it and I go on. I'm like, well, whatever. Someone else will like it. But not my thing. But no, not all readers are like that, and that's fine. I think like what we were saying. I think that there's some different ideas about what art is and what it should do or what it shouldn't do. For me, art asks questions. It doesn't answer them. And therefore, you can never limit a writer, you know, to, they have to be free to write about the world as it is. And there are terrible things in the world, and people are really complicated. And so, for example, you have to be able to write a book that asks the question, how do you feel about someone you maybe don't like, or you don't like a lot of things about her, or how she presents herself to the world? How can you find empathy for her? That is a really important question in the larger world, especially now, right? When things are so divided. So if you have, that's my idea about art, right? So it's not to condone things. It's not to say this is okay. It's not at all that. But you know, art has to be free to ask questions, and it cannot flinch. I don't like art that flinches, and I think that other people, they have different ideas, and you know, and I should say, smart people I respect, you know, would maybe say like, no, this is not a good thing in the world to be putting this language out there, and that, you know, that's fine. But I just disagree with that. I think I'm all about asking questions. So hopefully, what I would hope for those readers who are put off by it, I hope that they would read it, and even though they might hate Molly, and they might hate specifically how she speaks, I hope that they would also find themselves, but yet I feel for her, and I care about her, and then maybe ask themselves about that feeling. Does that make them uncomfortable? Because people don't have to be likable to have stories we need to listen to, right? And I think that's where sort of the crux, where I don't, care about narrative. I don't care. I like not liking characters. I'm fine with that. But I think, some readers are coming to fiction like they want to escape. They want to have like a charming romp through nostalgia or something, whatever. And that's not what they were expecting, and that's fine, right? That's fine. But that's not what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I want to open it up to questions from the audience if there are any.
So I would not buy that book if I ran into it on a bookshelf. But after hearing you read the opening, I'm going to buy it, and I found the first chapter incredibly effective. And now I'm coming at this from a reader of my generation, and as you were reading that chapter, the thought that went through my mind was, it was reminding me, not as though it was doing this, but it had the same kind of quality of bravado covering up for heartbreak that I heard as a young man reading Capturing the Rye.
Oh yeah.
And another voice that sort of captured a generational moment of angst. And I was wondering, as you were fashioning this voice and you were finding it, did you feel that you were expressing something about a young woman-to-be's generational angst? I haven't read the book, so I don't know if this is
I never thought about generation. I think if I had actually thought that might have been not good. Like
This is why I can't write.
Well, no. I mean, I don't know. I don't think anyone should sit down and be like, I'm gonna write the book of the generation. No, I don't think I never consciously thought that. I don't know. I've never actually even considered that before. So like Catcher in the Rye, which is also a book that has had like a totally wild change in reception. There are so many people that loathe that book now, and I'm like, that book is amazing. It's a masterpiece.
My students have loathed it.
So you've run into that. Okay, yeah. It's like they're a weird, like it does not compute. They have a totally different reaction. And now, and I wasn't, when I wrote this, I mean, I'd read Catcher in the Rye. I wasn't thinking about it too much. And then after I started seeing reviews, I'm like, holy shit, they're acting like this is like, that they're having that kind of they have that strange, like, this is so whiny and I can't handle it, and I don't know. But no, I wasn't thinking about that. But you know, if someone wants to go around and say that I wrote a book, go ahead. But no, I don't know. That's a good question. Is her? Okay, it's definitely of a time. It's definitely of the 90s. A lot of people, it's so funny, in Goodreads were saying things like, she only set this in the 90s so she could use every slur there was. And I'm like, no, I set this in the 90s because this is when I was this age. And I understand what it's like to be someone kind of close to Molly's age in that time. I don't know if I could write, no, actually no, now that I think about it, to answer your question, I don't think I could write a book about a 10-year-old in 2024. I have
I
one.
know I couldn't.
Yeah, but I don't have that, right? So I could do this. So in that way, maybe, you know, I do think there's something to the 90s, like the childhood was different then. And like some of the things that I think some readers, especially much younger readers, think are shocking aren't even really that shocking to me, because, you know, people were a little less overparented then, and they had more freedom, and their language was much, you know, from what I've seen, looser. And so yeah, in that way maybe it is. I was writing it from my, you know, from my own well, not my personal experience, but you know, my own sort of sense of being a kid at that age. So in that way, probably, yeah.
Could you tell me again what your first title was?
Let's see, the very first version
The Hidden
of
Hand,
it.
was it, or no?
Oh, the Hidden Hands. Yeah,
Okay,
the
so
Hidden Hands.
as someone who wanders around and decides whether I'm going to buy the book, that's why I'm not an agent, I would have chosen that title because that matched with the voice suggests the heartache I'm feeling in the prose.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Kittentits suggests that this is just raunch city.
Well, okay, so no, you're right. So some of that, I think, and this has been really, and I'm sure you have gone through this twice now, it's really interesting how the publisher buys the book, and then they get to decide how to market it. And it's like, so what you'll notice, like in the descriptions, they really emphasize fun, romp, adventure. And it is those things. And like the cover, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is totally those things. But it's also like, if you just read this, I think the book is, in lots of places, much more serious than it lets on, right? So that, like the cover, like, so like my publisher is totally not, you are not, but I want you to read it, right? But they're totally going after a very, a certain like sort of TikTok, book talk audience, which is fine.
It makes me despair.
But yeah, but I'm like,
me
it's
to
also
read the
serious
book.
literature. It's literary fiction. It's not, and so but they definitely kind of choose an angle, and that's what they're pushing, and you know, and I have no real say about that, but I mean, I do like it, and it's not wrong, because the book is like I said, like I think it is much more serious than this stuff lets on, but I also think it's really happy. It's weird, because I wanted it to be like, I wanted it to be a book that had a lot of sad parts and a lot of grief, but at the end of the day, I wanted it to feel like alive. I want Molly to feel alive, right? And the language and the prose to be alive, and so there's got to be fun parts too. Like there's got to be, and that's one of the things I like about Molly, is she's always gonna land on her feet, you know, and she's ultimately pretty hopeful, and she might, I don't know what to think of it, but she's gonna keep going, and so I didn't want it to be like a heavy, even there's a lot of heaviness in it, but they totally, I think that there's just so many readers who are like, oh, that's sad, I don't want to read it, or it's too, you know, which I'm with you with it. I despair about that too. I get it, yeah.
Look, you won me over. So.
Okay, well that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping it's like, well, I think their approach was like, come for the fun, and then you'll find out how sad it is, you know. And I think some people, like, you'll see that, some people in the reader are like, oh, I was not expecting that. But yeah, but that's marketing spin. You know. Yes?
I just want to say that I found an ad for this, like, going down a rabbit Facebook hole, and
cool.
I kind of saw this by accident last week, and I immediately emailed it to my high school friend graduated class of '89, and I was like, doesn't this look like something we need to do? Yeah, and I love the title. I think it's brilliant.
Totally
So I mean, I knew nothing about the book besides what I saw.
Yeah, no, that's the idea. That's
and
the
I was
idea.
Like, there is a huge market for this.
Yeah, no, and Dando knew what they were doing, and they're like, that's what we're calling it.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, all of my titles were much more like serious, like these but in some ways they didn't match the voice in some ways because her voice, I mean, she's ridiculous, and so yeah, it's a weird book, and I think like you just kind of have to pick like how are we gonna pitch it, right? And so yeah. So I am ultimately, it took me a while to adjust to it. I'm like, okay, yeah, I can wrap my head around that.
It's great. I was sold immediately from the title.
Well, excellent.
So I think you need to go with that too. I mean,
Yeah. No, I'm not going to change it back.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And I swear all the time, and you know, I was just looking, we were having this conversation, and I'm like, there's a graphic novel up there, and the title is Tits and Clits.
Yeah, right?
When did we, as kids, ever see these sorts of titles as, you know, as a former girl? I never saw that, and I would have loved it. And oh my god, it's pink, and there's a cat.
I know, yeah, the pink, yeah. When I opened up the file to see it for the first time, I was like, oh my god, I can't believe I have a pink book, but yeah,
it's
I like
brilliant.
this story.
I think it was brilliant marketing, honestly.
Well, the person who designed the cover did fantastic job. I think I love this. Encapsulates so much, I think, about
Chef's kiss.
yes. Thank you.
At the end of the conversation, you talked a little bit about how you think art should ask questions, and you talked about the empathy question, but what are some other questions that you hope the book asks?
Ooh. Okay, let's see. Good question. Well, the question about art, like, what is your relationship to art? Like, as much as it's so weird because I think Mombi she's just terrible. She's like the worst. I think she's the worst. Is she the worst one? I think she is. But yet hers is the like one I identify with the most, right? So, you know, okay. There's also like there's a scene where so DeMarcus is very high-minded and he's like sort of the foil counterpoint to Molly, and he thinks she's an idiot, and yet you know he sort of befriends her, and there's a scene where he really takes her to task, like, you know, you're a terrible person, right? You don't do anything good, right? What do you do for the world? You just walk around and you eat your Cheetos and you know, and then she gets upset and she says, I'm not bad, right? I'm not a bad person. And you know, she's not, right? Like, she's a loyal friend. She's probably the most a little too loyal. A very loyal friend. She has good qualities. And so I think that's a question, is like, what do we owe the world around us, right? I would like to say that I spend every moment of my life doing good things and helping humanity, right? But that's not true. I spend a lot of time eating corn dogs and enjoying bad television, right? And so, like, so I think, you know, a question sometimes people ask is like, well, are you, you know, do you see yourself in the main character? Is that you? And to some degree, but I don't know about you, but like, I find that what's really true is that all the characters are different parts of me, and they're having little fights with themselves, right? So DeMarcus is very much me. It's the better version of me, or a different version of me. And Molly's the sort of regular daily me, right? And so you have this higher, like, angel on your shoulder who's like, damn it, do something about climate change. And then, but yeah, what am I gonna do about climate change, right? So I think maybe the book might be a question, right? But I think really, like, how do we sit with people who have different childhoods than we have, who don't have the same experiences we have? how do we judge them, or should we judge them, or what do we make of that, right? I know there's probably a good one on this thing, but
For me, I think maybe one of the questions too, those are all in there, it's just kind of how do we live when we know we're going to lose what we love?
oh yes,
Right?
how do we live in a world in which death will always prevail? Yeah, that's like that's kind of the central question of all life, right? So like, thank you. That's like the most obvious thing. Yes, that's definitely it. Like how because there's no cheating death, right? And it's an interesting I teach sometimes in my classes. I teach this Bartholomew story, school, right? And this is it's a great story, and it's just you don't need to know what it's about. But basically, in this story, everyone dies in a really everybody dies one after the other. It's just people dying, and animals dying and plants dying, and it seems so strange and absurd, but it's not, because what happens? Every one of us is going to die, and so how do you live with that, right? You could be. So this is where I think Molly might have an advantage over DeMarcus a little bit, because Molly's prepared to live. And DeMarcus is sort of mired in, rightfully, mired in anger at his father and, all this, whereas Molly's going to continue to live, for sure. In the first version, I killed her at the end. I'll tell you, yeah. But then my agent didn't like it, and he was right. And
I was worried, it felt like we might be going that way, but.
Yeah. Well, no, the original ending was she also dies in the final fire, and then she becomes a ghost, and that was the last, was her becoming the Molly ghost, right? I thought it was fun. Because if they're ghosts, no one really dies, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't. So anyway, but no, he was like, no. So I wrote the epilogue. I changed it, and I actually I like this better, but yeah, I think that's definitely what it's asking.
Yeah, and Molly's interesting too. I'm just thinking about how we grapple with grief and loss and knowing that we're going to lose everything at some point or another. And Molly, on the one hand, she lives with it. I mean, we learn about in the first chapter about Sister Regina, who died in the fire, who's haunting the house, and only Molly can see her. And Molly mentions this, oh well, I just walked through Sister Regina, And at one point, I think there's a line while Dad and Evelyn were doing this in the kitchen, I was practicing walking back and forth through Sister Regina. It's just very calmly living with the ghost. But then in other moments, trying to bring people back from the dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that kind of captures the very human, okay, sometimes you feel okay with it, and then you panic and you realize you're not okay with it, actually, and that dynamic, I think Molly captures so well.
Yeah, being in the graveyard, thinking about all the dead. I did that when I was a kid. You're thinking about how gross are they now, right? What does it look like, and which is wild because it's but then you sort of put that away, and yeah.
Okay, I just have a comment to make. I'm Holly's mother. And I've read this book all along, while she's in different versions. I just don't feel like Molly's story is done.
Oh, Mom, I'm not ready. She wants me to write a sequel. I'm like, no.
It's not done, Holly.
Yes, it is. It's done.
Yeah, I would say listen to your mom, because Judy Blume told us about your period and never wrote anything about menopause. So maybe your mom might be on.
Oh, that's interesting. 45-year-old Molly.
Yeah.
That's what I told you.
She really wants it. I'll just make something up and I'll tell you on the way. Well, I'll make up the sequel, but I don't know. I'm just I'm sure, as you know, you're so tired of it. Yeah. You start to hate the book you're working on. You're you have to. I don't know. Maybe. No.
You have to decide today.
You want a sequel too?
Yeah.
See, there you go, Holly.
I guess it would have to be.
I want the next title.
I'll wait. I don't get in trouble. Yeah, that's a mom.
Yes.
Return of Kittentits returns back from the dead. And I'd have to come all, since so many people, they all die, so I'd have to.
They're ghosts.
True. now I'm starting something new, but it's not like this. So far, hopefully, I'm a little worried that everything I write will just turn into this voice, but no, it shouldn't.
Yeah, it's such a strong voice. I don't know if we have a ton of time to go into it, but one of my questions was, yeah, I mean, crafting that voice and then having that character is a really hard thing to do, and you do it so well. She's so bold. When you said the thing about you like art that doesn't flinch, I was like, that's Molly. Molly will never flinch, right? Again, I think that's a positive quality of her. She's just going to stand and stare down whatever it is. But yeah, did the voice take you a while to find?
No,
or was she always kind of there?
so I never. So I originally wrote a short story that was published and anthologized, and to write that, I just read Mark Richard's The Ice at the Bottom of the World, his story collection, and he's so good at child narrators, and I'd never really read anything quite like that before. And so I'm like, well, I'm gonna try a child narrator. I'd never written one before, and that's when I started writing Molly. And it just had so much energy. And I think, like, I don't know about your experience, but I find, not all writers, some writers have amazing range. But for me, as soon as I started writing in first person child voice, it just clicked and it had energy and it pulled me. And I was like, oh, so I could write Molly all day. Like, once I figured her out, I could just write her in my sleep. Sometimes when I was working really hard over the summers on her, I would even start to talk like her a little bit. Not all the way, but I found, with her rhythms and syntax and everything. So I think, like, everyone's voice is pitched a little, like, natural, regular, like, your singing voice is just a certain pitch. And I think this is where mine naturally pitches.
Yeah.
But what I would like to write, like you're writing, I've always wanted to write, like, kind of elegant, like pretty, elegant, lyrical, like, kind of stuff. And, like,
This is really lyrical.
well, it has these little moments where I try to, like, I sort of try to turn that up.
It's lovely and precise.
But,
and I want to write humor.
like,
I always try to be funny in
But no, so I read that, I'm like, well, I can't write like that. I can't write anything nice like that. Like, it's sort of beautiful and like I would like to be like, I don't know, write like modern day, like Jane Austen, Bronte, governesses proper, like beautiful, like or like a sort of feminine Cheever or something. And I don't know, I don't think it's in me. Or maybe I'll try.
I like this.
We'll see.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad I got to spend this time with Molly. You won't be disappointed if you buy the book. I know Holly will be at a table kind of signing over there as well for the next walk.
And you
have
too.
questions, I will be there as well. If you want a book also about grief but without as much humor, more Northwoods.
No, but there's I was thinking this today on the drive, there's things in common though.
Yeah.
There's like little weird connections, right? Like the girl, you have a 9-year-old who goes off and does this
Terrible thing.
really, no, there's other things I thought they're kind of connected.
Yeah. Next talk, the books will be in conversation.
Yeah.
Come again.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Ollie, for coming all this way to talk to us.
Oh,
thank you all for
absolutely.
coming
Thank
out
you.
on
Thank
a summer
you.
night. And one more round of applause for Holly.